Thanks everyone for attending today's webinar, Charge Together Fleets. This exciting webinar on the lessons learned from Australia's largest EV fleet charging installation to date. My name is Adrian Hilson. I'm the CEO and founder of Evenergi and the chair of the Charge Together Fleet program, a program that's brought to you and facilitated through the Electric Vehicle Council, funded by ARENA, New South Wales Government, Ausgrid, NRMA and South Australian Government. When the ACT government made the bold national announcement that it would be going 100% to electric vehicles, I think it caught many people by surprise and challenged the whole industry to think about how it could work. From how to get the vehicles available, to how to afford the vehicles, to how to put the charging infrastructure in, how to do the staff engagement. It was a very challenging project and a project that we were honoured to be involved in. So today we're going to hear about the many lessons learned. With any pioneering project, it's obviously not simple, and many of the lessons you think you'll learn are different to the ones you actually learn. So it'll be interesting to hear from Adrian, who's led the infrastructure side of the project and obviously been across the whole project from the ACT government, and also Tim Washington, one of the best known industry participants. Some would call him a rock star of the industry, but yeah, it'll be great to hear from Tim as well with his deep experience across this space. So I will hand over. The protocol that we have on these webinars is that you can feel free to ask questions, but please type them into the chat box and I will ask them at the end. And when you ask the question, please let us know who you are and what organisation you represent. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Adrian, who will lead the first part of the webinar. Thank you.
So first, just a little bit about me. As Dan mentioned, I'm running the transition to zero-emission vehicles at the ACT government. And as part of this challenge, the first step was to install 50 charging stations. So Tim and I want to keep this very short and sweet and have ample room for questions at the end. So Tim is going to talk more about the technical challenges of getting these stations, and I wanted to just give you a bit of a background of why it is that we decided to follow this path. So last Friday, we have a climate strike around the world. There was one of the largest congregations of people asking and demanding global powers to do something about the environment. And as you might already know, this January was the hottest month around the world. And for these reasons, the ACT government released last week our new climate change strategy that has a lot of commitments, from transitioning all our buildings to be 100% electric, transition our transport camera bus fleet by 2040 to be zero emissions. And obviously, the thing that concerns us to have all our fleet vehicles to be zero emissions. So this graph here shows a little bit of the pathway that we are in. As you can see, historical emissions have been going up in the ACT, and it happened to be around 2010 that we started developing actions to slow emissions, and there's a huge gap coming, and that huge gap going down is the 100% renewable target that we'll reaching pretty much around these days, and certainly by 2020. In this graph, we can see the emissions per sector. So this orange on the circle on the left is energy, electricity. That was the main source of emissions back in 2012. By going hard on that target and achieving the 100% renewable target, we basically got rid of all that orange. And as you can see on the circle on the right hand, that's the blue that corresponds to transport is now the largest sector, which is 62% of the emissions in the ACT. And for that reason, we are doing everything we can to get rid of emissions for transport. So just to give you a bit of a context in terms of policy, the way we're looking at it is not just replacing every petrol car with electric, but is first to start with, is this something, if we have a meeting, is this something that we can do online to avoid traveling to the site? if we definitely need to go, is it close by? Can we walk there? Can we bike? Is there any chance to do public transport or carpooling or car sharing? And finally, if we definitely need to use a car, is there a chance for it to be electric? So for this reason, we put together the zero emissions action plan back in April 2018. And one of the first actions for this plan was to put 50 charging stations for government fleet vehicles at different government buildings. Right now we have 31 zero emission vehicles in our fleet, and we'll increase to over 80 by mid-2020. We are getting 20 hydrogen vehicles sometime in early 2020. And we're helping with all these actions to kick off the second-hand market once these fleet vehicles are going for sale for the general public. So our first step was to engage Evenergi, and that was very, very helpful to help us developing communication tools and conducting all the preliminary research for choosing which sites were the most suitable ones to receive charging stations. And obviously looking at our whole fleet and the use that we have and which vehicles were suitable to be replaced with electric. So I'm not gonna go into the details of that process because I'm sure Dan will be more than happy to set up another webinar to explain all of you how exactly was that this process went through. But Evenergi will, well, they gave us at the end 10 priority sites where we decided to put these 50 charging stations. So from a high level perspective, what makes a good candidate site? First of all, we need to find out where your vehicles are and the number of candidate vehicles to be replaced with electric. We need to make sure that we have enough parking for these electric vehicles. We had, for example, investigations to see if there was enough electrical capacity installed at the building. We went through safety issues. Some of the sites where we were supposed to put charging stations were subject to vandalism, so we decided to not work with these ones at the moment. The complexity, some places are very simple to electrify, new buildings. The car park spots are very close to the distribution board. Some others are more challenging. We need to dig trenches. We need to go through asbestos. We need to go through multiple challenges. And finally, if you decide to connect your charging stations, is there communications available? Maybe you're in a second level car park, and that's going to be complicated to connect. But I'm going to let Tim go in detail on these different aspects. So once you decide to electrify your fleet, there's a lot of questions that need to be asked. And starting from, do you want to have rapid chargers, fast chargers, DC, AC? Do you need a mix of them? Are they going to be wall mounted, pole mounted? We discussed if we need dual charging station, or is it better to have just single charging stations? What is your vehicle to charger radio, for example? Is this, in our case, we're having one charging station installed per vehicle, but maybe you had the capacity to have one person that is charging different cars and moving around them, and you probably can have more vehicles charging with just one single station. We went for type 2, which is a standard in Australia. We needed to have conversations if this was going to be dumb charging installations or were they going to be networked. Home charging was a big issue for us. There's 17% of our fleet vehicles sleep as staff residences. So do we really want to install charging stations at people's houses? Is that something we want to do? At this stage, we're not doing, we're not considering. We're thinking that these cars will have some opportunistic charging during the day, wherever they stop to for 20 minutes to get a quick charge. All these charging stations that we're installing are for private use of the ACT government. But there's conversations to have some of them available to the public. That's something that we might be looking into the future. What is the allocation of cost? How do we make sure that the charging for the electric vehicles goes to the right agency, and for allocation of cost? And finally, operational requirements, like if it's possible for this car to be charging at this specific station, or it needs to go to a different place. So that's it for my presentation. I wanted to, and obviously I'm very happy to expand on the questions. That's the reason we wanted to keep it short. Just wanted to show you this picture of the electric fire truck. This is a project that we're running at the moment with Rosenbauer, a developer from Germany of electric vehicles. And the reason why this one is exciting is because he's redefining what is fit for purpose and what isn't. Our fleet is comprised of 1,200 vehicles, and we have everything from passenger vehicles to large utes and rubbish trucks. And at the moment, we're only concentrating on passenger vehicles because those are the ones that were deemed fit for purpose. But this electric fire truck, it's making everything fit for purpose. So that's the reason why we're running this trail. So that's it for me. Yep.
Great, thanks a lot for that, Adrian. Very interesting and a good start. And I might just hand over now to Tim. If you want to just stop sharing, Adrian, and Tim, you can start sharing.
Yep, no worries. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, perfect.
All right, cool. Just give me a sec. I'm happiest when I am sharing, so okay. All right, guys. I'm a big believer in practical things, so I'm going to concentrate on basically, practically speaking, nuts and bolts, what you need to do when you're looking at EV charging for your fleet, and I encourage all of you to ask me as detailed kind of questions as you'd like. So who are JetCharge? We install charging infrastructure, we supply it, we develop our own infrastructure as well. I would say we're probably Australia's largest EV charging infrastructure business, and Chargefox, which is our sister company, is the largest public charging network in the country. So one of the things we're really proud of doing at JetCharge is we partner with corporate and government fleets just to make it easy. That's what we're really focused on. We just want to make it simple, no fuss, and we use experience to do that. So the first thing I wanted to cover off was, and this is something that we discussed at length with the ACT government, is what kind of charging station do you install? Some of you will have seen this graph that I've shown before, which is basically, here are all the charging stations available to you, all the way from what I would say is a PowerPoint style portable charging station you plug into a 10 amp, all the way through to the really expensive 350 kilowatt rapid charging stations that you see on freeways. So the one on the right hand side is definitely no, it's too expensive, you don't need it. It's for people who are traveling interstate and need to charge up really quickly. Similarly, on the left, my view is that if you are serious about your fleet of EVs, you're probably not going to charge it from a PowerPoint. There's a whole lot of reasons for that. The first is it's very slow. The second thing is it's very hard to bill accurately because anybody can plug anything to a PowerPoint. So even if you reserve it for electric vehicle charging, if somebody comes along and plugs, I don't know, a vacuum cleaner in because they're, you know, cleaning the a car or whatever, that will skew your costs for your electric vehicles. And so we try not to encourage that. The thing that you're really focusing on is what we call AEC charging. So this is the kind of stuff that you put on your wall, and you'll see photos in a sec of the installations we've done for the ACT government. That's the stuff that you should be concentrating on. The photo there is basically a wall mount unit as well as a dual port unit, which is the EV Link. And, you know, there are lots of models out there. You can kind of do your own shopping. But the key is that it needs to be universal. So what we mean by that is it needs to have what we call a Type 2 socket. The reason we go for Type 2 socket is twofold. The first is that it was only recently that the vehicles have all swapped to Type 2 for their AC charging, so Type 2 plug. And Mitsubishi is still on Type 1, although I believe they will be changing. But it also means that a lot of fleets have a mixture of new and older electric vehicles. You want to be able to cater for all of those vehicles. And so if you install a Type 2 socket charging station, you just need to change out the lead and then you can charge either one. So that's pretty important. The second thing is that if it is that in the future, if for whatever reason there's another standard, it will still be compatible. I don't predict that will happen, but it's just in case. We also, as you would have heard Adrian say before, we always recommend one-to-one with the car right now. And the reason for that is the biggest cultural barrier you will have to smash is you will have to remind everyone to plug in when they come back to the office or the commercial building or home or whatever. You have to remind them to plug in. And as we all know, people always take the path of least resistance, which basically means that if you don't have a parking spot reserved for that car with a charging station that's free, they're not going to plug it in. And then they're not going to tell you that they didn't plug it in. And you're not going to know. And then someone else is going to jump in the car and it hasn't been charged. They will then come to you as the fleet manager or the facilities manager or the sustainability manager and say, I've tried this EV thing, it sucks because I couldn't charge it, because the car wasn't charged. You as the manager of these vehicles, it's not your job to go down there every day to check whether it's charged. You need to basically build the systems to ensure that it is charged. And so if you have a charging station available all the time for the vehicles that are parked in that building, you can ensure that there's always a car space for them to charge. I think that's really, really important, especially at this early stage. I don't foresee a world where the fleet manager becomes like a valet kind of person and goes and moves the car around. I don't see that happening. Then on the right-hand side, the other one I've put a square around is what I would call a 25 kilowatt DC charger. Now, there will be some instances, especially for people with multi-shift, so more logistics companies, for example, or where you need to do a lot of kilometers, or where you have basically cars coming in and out the whole time, taxi fleets, etc. You'll probably need some DC charging stations as well to give it a quick top up. Now, I think a 25 kilowatt DC charging station, which will charge your car up at between 100 to 150 kilometers of range an hour, should be enough. If for your particular circumstances, you need something a bit bigger, you can go the 50 kilowatt unit. Now, obviously, I don't recommend many of these because they're very expensive. And so if you can get away with it, you stick with the AC charging. But it's not a bad idea to have like a backup DC charger in case you're one of those fleets that need a quick turnaround. So that's the kind of choice when it comes to charging stations. These pictures are obviously illustrative, and I always encourage you to do your own shopping, starting with us, hopefully, but just kidding. Okay, so the second bit is talking about smart versus dumb charging. So I'll define it a little bit. Smart charging is basically where you have the ability to monitor a charging station. You can see how much electricity it is using. You can control it. You can remotely start it, reboot it, etc. So it's connected to the internet. A dumb charging station is basically, or I call it, a standalone charging station, so as not to be offensive to the charger. But a standalone charging station is more like a power point. So you can't control it, it's not visible, you don't know if it's plugged in, you don't know if it's broken, but it's plug and play, so it works, right? Standalone charging stations are more likely what you'll find at home. So someone's purchased a car and they just want something to plug into the car. They probably buy a standalone charging station. But a smart charging station is probably more for fleets. And the way I define it is, if you want to treat the vehicle like a fleet car, you get a smart charger. So if you view electric cars as the future of your fleet, or you actually want to integrate the EV into your fleet, you get a smart charger. If you are just doing it for a trial, you're not sure, you're probably only going to get one for the next 3 years, it's more like an experiment, you don't really care about the fuel bill or your electricity bill, then sure, get a standalone charging station. It's probably about 50% cheaper. So, that's up to you. But my view is that just like you wouldn't say, don't worry about it to your petrol bill, right? You would never say for your petrol or diesel bill, oh, we don't need to take into account how much fuel they use. We don't really care. The same thing needs to be said for electricity as well, because electricity is just fuel. It's just fuel for your car. And so as the fleet manager or someone who's looking after the fleet pool, you need to care about how much fuel you're using. And so for electric cars, that's electricity. So I encourage everybody to go with the smart charging option. Okay. The third thing that has come up is basically a lot of these, the ACT government went like really into detail and did extensive works to prepare their buildings and to kind of future-proof their buildings for EV penetration. But one of the things that a lot of people are going to face is, I don't have enough electrical capacity, right? So your on-site Sparky has gone around and said, you know, this distribution board was built in the 1960s, we don't have enough capacity, blah, blah, blah. All of that might be true, but one thing you should be aware of is that there are now technology solutions to dynamically balance the load across charging stations. Because often in these situations, I mean, don't get me wrong, some situations are just dire and you just need to upgrade. But in a lot of cases, it's all about managing the peaks. So it's not so much about, you know, can we charge all of these cars in an overnight period? It's more about, you know, everybody comes back to work with their pool cars at 4 or 5 p.m. How do we make sure they don't all plug in at once, right? And the load management systems on the market will do that. It will monitor how much electricity is going through the building. In JetCharge's case, you know, we'll monitor the building, we monitor each distribution board, and we monitor the cars to make sure that we never trip the existing supply. One thing I would strongly encourage all fleet managers to do in this instance is to make sure that whatever energy management or load management system they install, it needs to work with multiple brands of hardware and it needs to work with multiple brands of software. So you can't be tied into any one hardware or software manufacturer, right? Because over the next 20 to 30 years, you know, maybe after you've left the job, someone will buy another charging station from another brand. You can't have a situation where you're kind of like beholden to one hardware or software manufacturer. So you need to make sure that it's hardware and software agnostic. And, you know, there are products on the market that will do that. So this is kind of how it works, you know, if someone, and we use this as an apartment example, but, you know, you can imagine this for commercial buildings as well, is that everybody comes back and at 7 p.m, the system actually stops a lot of the cars from charging and it actually reduces the charge rate for a lot of people. But at 1 a.m, everyone's pumping, right? Because nothing really is going. And same thing in the commercial space, you know, you'll be using a bit of power when everyone's at work, but once everybody leaves work, nothing's on. So you can pump all of that power into the charging. So this gives you a lot more options in terms of where you install, and it reduces your cost because it means you don't have to upgrade a lot of your electricals. So here are some photos of the charging stations we installed, deployed, I think close to 50 now. If you can utilize existing infrastructure, I encourage you to do so. The ACT government had some leftover charging stations that they installed, I think in 2010 or 11. And they had pedestals done for that. So we just basically took the charging stations off and replaced them with smart chargers. So where you can save costs, you know, do so. Just because it's a new infrastructure project doesn't mean you can't utilize what's already there. And the other thing to keep in mind is that these charging stations, they're not mobile phones, right? They're not consumer-facing devices. They don't need to be aluminium unibody. In fact, I have this thing where I don't particularly enjoy charging stations with, you know, big screens and everything because I feel like they're the first things to get vandalized. What you need in a fleet scenario is you need it to be sturdy, you need it to be car park furniture, and you need it to work. So those are them, and you need them to be robust. They're the things that I think are really, really important. And, you know, it will really change, I think, how you view car parks. It will, you know, car parks will just look like this in the future. One thing you will notice about these charging stations is that I tell you, oh, you need a type 2 socket, but then, hey, these have cords on them. What gives? And the reason for that is because the cords that we supplied as part of this project actually are just plugged into the charging station. So they're still type 2 socket, but we actually supply a separate cord with it to plug into the charging station because the ACT government knows what each charging station is, what kind of car they're going to be for. And the way we prevent people from actually stealing the cables is that we put a little cable cleat that's locked against the wall. So you still have freedom of movement for the cable, but you can't take them off the wall. And the other great thing is for maintenance purposes, because the cable is the thing that gets used the most, it's also probably the first thing that will break. And so instead of replacing the whole charging station, in this case, you can just take it off the wall and replace the cable instead. So it drastically reduces your maintenance bill as well. But if you have a lot of EVs, then this is kind of what your car park will look like. It's unobtrusive and it's usable. This is the last slide. So there's 4 things that I really want to go through. Okay, so when you're looking at charging, right? So the first and often overlooked thing is that the charging stations that get supplied into a building need to be what we call pre-commissioned, right? So any electrician can kind of go into a hardware supplier like an AWM or a MIDI's or whatever and say, I'd like a charging station, please. You wouldn't believe the number of calls we get from electricians who've purchased these stations and basically said, I've installed it, it doesn't work, right? So you need to view EV charging more as an integrated solution package rather than just a box. The exception to that is if you're buying a standalone charging station. If you're buying a standalone charging station, sure, connect the terminals and it'll probably just work. But for a smart charging solution, especially for your fleet, it needs to be looked at properly. It needs to be pre-commissioned before it goes on site. And you need to have engineering support on the software side to make sure everything works. It's not a simple matter of connecting the terminals and bang, you're good to go. The second thing is education. Don't treat education as an afterthought, because one of the biggest barriers you're going to face is cultural. And people won't want to drive the car, or they don't know how to charge, or they don't know if they can plug in the rain, or they don't know if you can drive through water and all of that stuff, right? We've had all these kind of questions before. I can hear all of you laughing in the background. I'm just assuming you're laughing. So with the education side, often it's not priced into projects. That's one of the things we found, handover material, getting someone to go there, explain the system and all that. That's often not priced into projects, both internally and externally. Jet Charge are terrible at pricing education. We might spend a couple of days walking people through stuff, but we don't price into tenders. So if you're writing tenders, I strongly encourage you to actually place a little bit of budget aside for education, both from an internal perspective as well as for your external contractors. So I strongly encourage that. Please do so. The third thing is, how does the billing and the metering and all of that work? Well, when you're putting together an integrated smart charging system, each charging session should be monitored. So it should have a meter inside the charging station. And you can connect it to the Chargefox platform. There are others. And each charging session should be monitored. That should be, the billing should be integrated with your existing systems. So for example, in this case, Chargefox platform is integrated with SG Fleet. SG Fleet are the ones who kind of coordinate ACT government's fleet. And so it's integrated with the SG Fleet dashboard so that all of your fuel expenses and reports and all of that stuff that you would normally get for petrol, you also get for your electric cars. So I would strongly suggest that you kind of contact your existing fleet providers and see what kind of solutions they have in place. Or if you're interested, you can contact me and we can basically run you through how independent of them the billing system might work. One thing that I think is really important and something that is often overlooked as well is that because we're in early stage for EV adoption, a lot of things slide. One of those is the technology platforms that sit behind charging stations. And you need to make sure that whatever solution you're providing, and this was especially true for the ACT government, that you're getting a lot of data. You need to make sure that the solutions provider complies with Australian privacy laws and is compliant with Australian standards, and that it's undertaken security assessments from basically people in Australia. You need to have confidence with that. And so one very simple example is you need to make sure that the server that does this, right, is in Australia. It's very simple stuff, but it's often overlooked because people think it's early days. And the last kind of question is, and something that we haven't fully answered yet, is, what happens when they charge on kind of charging stations in in the wild, right? That, for example, aren't part of the Chargefox charging network. So right now we do, manual reconciliation like you do if you don't have if you use a petrol station that's not on your current fuel card. But we need to, as an industry, look at interoperability. We need to look at data sharing and stuff like that. And the last thing is we do it so that the RFID is assigned to a vehicle and not to an individual, because we don't care so much in a fleet sense about the individual, we care more about the vehicle. So that's something, just a really small practical thing that I encourage you to think about. And that's it.
Great, thanks very much, Tim. And
Thanks.
thank you, Adrian. That's great. And now we'll go over to some questions from the field. And I noticed that Steve Elmore and Carola from Evenergi and Steve Elmore from ABB are there, so feel free to put stuff in the chat box. I can't obviously ask you directly, but if you do have any feedback for people, put it in the chat box. Yeah, so I guess the first question that came through was have you installed the infrastructure and for how long? And I guess a kind of an adjacent question to that would be, are you seeing any statistics yet about utilization and all that kind of thing to date? Maybe Adrian, you can go first, and then Tim, you can come in if you have anything else. You're on mute, Adrian. I'm not sure if you're talking.
Yeah. There.
We can hear you now, mate. That's fine.
Hello. Okay. So yes, we have installed 47 out of 50. We have issues with 3 that are still waiting to be installed in the near future. And as of this morning, we have had utilization in 45 of those charging stations already. So yeah, the network is live and running.
Great. I guess maybe a supplementary question, Tim, is, I mean, in this install and in general installs, I mean, the experience of the data coming through compared to what you might have thought, is there anything different, or is it kind of what you would expect the data to look like?
I'll talk in a general sense because I try not to share my customers' data, but I'll talk in a general sense, and that is we've been really, really surprised about the kind of data that's come through the Chargefox network. And at the same time, once we see this data, we kind of realize we shouldn't be that surprised. And the first thing is that the vast majority of charging sessions are 7 kilowatt hours or less. So what that means is that the vast majority of vehicles are plugging in almost every time they come back to base, and they only do 7 kilowatt hours, which depending on your car is around 35 to 50 kilometers. And it also means that it's pretty much fully charged in an hour if you've got a 7 kilowatt charging station. And so that basically lines up actually with kind of how far on average Australians drive. A lot of the charging stations on our network are fleet. And so, yeah, the vast majority are under 7 kilowatt hours.
Great, it's really interesting. So a question from Inez. Are you thinking, so I guess to Adrian, are you thinking of prioritizing electric or hydrogen vehicles? Do you have a view on that as yet, or are you still kind of...
Yeah, well, we had this conversation for a long time, and it's a bit philosophical in which one is going to come first. But at that, right now we are agnostic with technology, and personally I see future in electric and hydrogen as well. Every time we discuss hydrogen, everybody says this is 2045, this is the last solution, this is going to take decades to be solved. But this is a very good example of how government can influence directly one technology against another, because part of the project that we're running is we're putting a refueling station for hydrogen, and that's going to make stuff that probably was meant to happen in the next 10 years that is just going to become available immediately. One very interesting thing is that maybe Tim has some thoughts on this. Once we discussed to have public charging stations, like fast rapid chargers available in the public to charge the fleet, and most people said, no, it's not convenient, I need to drive to that location to top up my vehicle, and it's complicated, it's not going to work. When we discuss the hydrogen vehicles, just having one refueling station, which is a plan at this stage, we're going to have just one single refueling hydrogen station in the whole Canberra, every fleet manager is happy going there to refuel with hydrogen. And every time I ask the question, what was that different from going to a public charging station to refuel with electricity your car? They have the same issue. They don't have any issues going to just one refueling station, but they feel uneasy when they need to have just one public charging station.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Adrian. I haven't heard that story before. Makes me shudder a little bit. But it's, I mean, one thing I'll point out to people, I won't make too many comments about hydrogen, apart from like my personal opinion is that it will be reserved for heavier vehicles. But the thing to note is that, you know, if you go past the cultural barrier of getting people to plug in when they come back to base, you think about it, it's actually far easier to charge where the cars are parked. And the other thing is, even if you don't think that's the case, we're actually not that far away from being able to refuel an EV in 5 to 10 minutes, right? The only thing that's really stopping it is thermal management in the vehicles. So we're already down to 15 minutes in the kind of newer 800 volt kind of cars that are coming out, and the charger technology is already there at between 7 to 10 minutes. And at 7 to 10 minutes, that's actually, if not the same, a little bit quicker than hydrogen refueling. So even if you didn't believe that, you know, charging in your building is the right way to go, the future of public EV charging will mean that it's super, super quick anyway.
Great, thanks very much for that. I'm just noticing people aren't necessarily putting in where they're from, so if you could do that, it'd be helpful. First question from Ed Ma, who I believe is from Curtin University. Adrian, have you needed to do much work to build servicing capability among local dealerships in the ACT?
That's a good one. We actually, that was part of the challenge. Where are we going to service the vehicles? And if we are going to end up having like 80 by July 2020, where are we going to take those vehicles to be serviced? We were very lucky in this space because the dealers were keen on becoming EV ready. So they actually approached us to give them support letters so they can raise the case with their national headquarters to get the training and accreditation to become EV ready to service our vehicles. So rather than us trying to convince them and talk them to, they were actually knocking on our door asking for support to get these things. So locally we have Nissan dealerships and Renault dealerships that have already been certified to do the service of these vehicles. And we're looking at expanding that for another dealerships.
Great, thank you. I have a question from Derek. Have you had any issues with supply to date requiring demand management to activate the charger when required current is available? So maybe Tim. So have there actually been any instances where you need demand management so far?
No, not yet.
And on any of the sites you've got, has there been that need to date?
Not on the ACT government side, I believe, but we've installed it in some other retrofits and new builds, but that's more with an eye on the future. Chances are in existing buildings right now, there isn't enough demand and natural kind of diversification will cover it. But I think that's probably going to change in the next couple of years.
Okay. Lake Macquarie Council, what progress is being made on network interoperability for payment and data sharing? Probably Tim again.
None right now. Sorry, I'm pretty honest. So none at the moment, and that's a mix. That's for two reasons. The first is so I'll put it out there right now, and Chargefox is very willing to kind of look at interoperability. It's definitely not a problem for us. The problem is that a lot of the existing players aren't in charge of their own software development. So it's a bit harder to do interoperability. Kind of they're just products from overseas. And the second is, I think, even though people have called for it, there hasn't been enough of a kind of a call to get all the players together to kind of discuss how we would do it. But it's definitely something that I want to tackle next calendar year. I'm tackling another kind of professional challenge at the moment, but next calendar year, that's kind of what I'm going to tackle is the interoperability piece.
Right. Harley Mitchell from Ausgrid. have you had any interest so far in charging heavy fleet vehicles? I guess either in the ACT government or I guess generally speaking.
Yeah, I can speak for the ACT government. We are now, as I would mention on the initial presentation, we're getting an electric fire truck. So at the moment, we are doing site investigations at all the depots of electric fire trucks that could potentially be upgraded to receive the charging infrastructure. So yeah, that's definitely something we're looking at. We're looking at transitioning our fleet of electric buses by 2045. And also we're looking at rubbish trucks, and the charging needs for all of those are something we're looking at. And at the moment it looks like, and maybe team has some information on this, but it looks like the 50 kilowatt DC fast charger could be the right solution for this type of vehicles.
Yeah, so we've started installing DC charger infrastructure for heavier vehicles now. We're seeing the interest at around 50 to 80 kilowatts. One thing that's been emphasized to us is the fast turnaround that's required for these vehicles. And so a lot of the heavier trucks, the battery packs can accept anywhere from 70 to 80 kilowatt charging. And so we're actually installing and looking at 80 kilowatt to 100 kilowatt charging solutions for those heavier vehicles. Yeah, but it's all starting, absolutely.
Great. Well, Tim, I'm going to open the door to, I know what's your current most exciting discussion point, which is around vehicle to grid. And Ed Marr also has asked a similar question around grid interactive vehicles and projects. And I guess it is quite early still, particularly in Australia. I mean, do you have a view on where it's going? Adrian, also you can jump in if you like. And
Yep.
Are there income opportunities for businesses that are investing seriously in EVs?
So yes, I would say long term there is. We are kind of still early days. There's quite a lot of activity around vehicle to grid trials in Australia at this stage, and that's been mostly buoyed by Nissan's announcement that their bi-directional charging on the new Nissan Leaf won't affect battery warranty. So it's spurred like this new wave of vehicle to grid interest. Me being part of this new wave, I really kind of am interested in it now because of those warranty concerns. So yes, in the long term, there will be revenue opportunities for fleet managers. I believe there actually will be significant revenue opportunity for fleet managers to the extent where through vehicle to grid, as well as through a few other kind of smart charging revenue stacks, I think we can achieve not only net basically free fuel, free electricity for fleets, we can probably make them a revenue center. So I think there's enough money in the market to make that happen. So we're kicking off the first projects probably at the end of this year.
Yeah, and I probably just want to add to that Tim was mentioning before that he doesn't see the future of the fleet managers being like ballet person unplugging cars and plugging the next one. But what I really see the future of the fleet managers is being the people that is like grid operators of these electric vehicles and managing how they interconnect to the grid and creating revenue for the building and using these assets to do more. There's a research published by the Australian National University that says that we can get up to $3,000 yearly on return connecting these electric vehicles to the grid. And the revenue model is based on a FCAS, which is a frequency control ancillary services, which is mainly the very hot days in summer and the very cold days in winter when we don't have enough electricity and we have to bring it from somewhere else to the crazy, incredible, expensive prices. Just by tapping into the electric vehicles, these 2 or 3 days of a year that will help the grid to come from a complicated situation will give us that sort of revenue.
And just to put it in context a little bit as well, Dan, is that if you've got an average kind of commercial building with like a few levels of car park, and let's just say you've got 400 cars parked there, and let's just pretend in a future where all of these are electric, which is probably sooner than we think, and all of them are capable of bi-directional charging. If they were all pumping out 7 kilowatts, which is possible today, then that building will be outputting 2.8 megawatts of load into the grid. So we will be able to support the grid at 2.8 megawatts if that building had 400 cars. And then you multiply that across all the other buildings. And then you think, okay, well, in situations where the grid comes under strain, under our hotter and hotter summers, then surely the vehicles have a role to play. And certainly you need some diversification because some people actually need to use the cars, drive around to meetings and stuff like that. But especially for employees who drive to work, for the cars that are there at the moment, you add all of those things together and you've literally got, power stations worth of power in a central area. And that's the kind of stuff that I think is going to be really exciting about, how we treat cars and how the grid operates in the future.
Okay, so just a practical question. I'm not sure if you can answer this, Adrian, because these cars on the picture that I'm showing, I think are a bit old now, but do you know where they got branded? How do you actually put those
It was actually an initiative from SG Fleet, which is our fleet operator, and they came to us with the proposal like, hey, these cars are electric, but looking from the outside, it's going to be hard for the general public to know that they are electric. And will you be keen to put something that clearly shows that it is electric, like a plug and everything? And they my understanding is they got a graphic designer to do this work, and I'm pretty happy. They're very recognizable on the streets, and people just really catch with those things. Now we're trying to find a similar pattern for the hydrogen ones. Not exactly sure how that one is going to look, but yeah, that's SG Fleet's initiative.
Great. So a question, I guess, on one of the points that was brought up. I mean, obviously, a lot of people charge at home, and the thing that we get in many of the consulting engagements we have, or that's heard a lot, is how do you charge at home and with fleet vehicles? And I know, Tim, you were looking at something. I'm not sure how far it got in terms of metering at home, and we've obviously, I can talk to a couple of the solutions that we've looked at. But did you sort of take that any further, Tim, in terms of your kind of solutions around home charging?
Yeah, I'm very conscious. I don't want to turn this into like a kind of a commerce promotional thing for JetCharge, but there are metering solutions now on the market and coming onto the market early next year where you'll be able to do billing reconciliation if someone just plugs into a PowerPoint. And so that's probably what we think for people who don't have a car full-time at home, who may take a pool car home or whatever. That's probably the best solution, where you plug into a PowerPoint, but it still kind of recognizes how much electricity you've used and reconciles it against the car. And the second thing is that if you do have a novated lease or you do have tool trade vehicles that are parked at home, that we've got programs now where the charging station kind of gets installed and removed as the car basically lives at the home. So, if they get a car, it gets installed. If they don't have the car anymore, it gets removed, stuff like that. So those are kind of solutions we looked at. Not sure about you, Dan.
Yeah, no, certainly that's a big question that comes up a lot is, we've got a staff member who's starting and leaving, and that sort of portability. I mean, we've looked at more cost allocation mechanisms where the entire sort of pool of electricity that's used is just allocated, but there's different ways to do it. And it certainly is solvable. And I think, the reason I bring it up is I think a lot of people are very hesitant to do it, but it's a huge cost saving if you can do that intelligently for some fleets. So yeah, I think it's an important point to consider. So the other question, I guess, in terms of the relationship with SG Fleet, you mentioned, Adrian, do you want to sort of elaborate any more on how that works and how you suggest others work with FMOs?
Yeah, it's really good because one of the main stoppers potentially for transitioning to electric vehicles is if the lease companies, the companies that are managing the fleet are against electric vehicles, or they have a bias against them for any reason. And we were very lucky because SG Fleet is actually not our contract. They have a contract with the Commonwealth to provide vehicles, and we just are part of that contract. And they decided to develop a pathway for electrification. So they came out with this strategy called e-Start, where they talk to the customers through what are the benefits behind transitioning to electric, what are the issues they might find, and how they can help and assist them from getting electric vehicles and finding what is the suitable replacement for the specific use, to installing charging stations and finding where they should be installed or not. And yeah, they've been very helpful on our transition to electric vehicles. So the way it works right now is when a fleet manager needs to replace a vehicle, they contact SG Fleet, and SG Fleet in return gives them a suite of options of electrification. If you're replacing, let's say, a Toyota Corolla, you have a number of vehicles like, let's say, a Hyundai Ioniq or a Nissan Leaf that could do the same kind of work for you. And the other thing I wanted to discuss is I saw a question on the chat on resale values, and this is a very important one because we had old Nissan Leafs that we got in 2013, and they're ending the lease, and they've been sold already to the second-hand market for very good prices, 17,000, 19,000 Australian dollars. And what SG Fleet is doing now is they're updating their lease models to recognize these end of lease cost for these vehicles, and that's giving us in return cheaper lease rates for these electric vehicles, which originally were really high, mainly because the assumption was that at the end of the life of the electric vehicle, they wouldn't have any value. They wouldn't have any resale value, mainly for concerns on battery degradation or other issues. There was a lot of uncertainty back then. And now that we have gone through the whole cycle and we're actually selling them into the secondhand market, there's a lot of optimism on resale values.
That's great. So I guess on the biggest challenges that you've faced to date on this project, I know that there was some having been involved. I mean, what do you think the advice to people who need to do this would be in terms of some of the biggest challenges that you faced?
The thing is, like any project, just start as early as you can. If you're thinking on transitioning your fleet in the next 3-5 years time, you need to start today. You need to start making considerations because there's a number of things that are going to take time. And I'll start from the high level perspective. When we announced the transition to zero emission vehicles in April 2018, we didn't have any commercially available vehicle on the market. We had a small amount of Renault Zoes that some of our fleet managers have deemed as not suitable for their daily duties, and that was it. So that's why the ACT government was bold on making an announcement to replace everything with something that was not available in the Australian market back then. We were lucky, and through the last 12 months, we had a number of electric vehicles coming into Australia, but we're still struggling to make ends meet. If you put an order for an electric vehicle today, you have about 6 months waiting time to get that order to be placed. And that's on the electric vehicle side. Then you have to work to your charging infrastructure. And in that, I think the best advice that we can give you is to spend as much time as you can looking at your buildings and get a consultant like Evenergi or anyone that will be in the position to tell you, this is a good building to electrify. This is maybe not an optimum building, because that could be the difference between spending 9 months and putting money in investigations of something that is not going to work compared to a building that is perfect for electrification, and you will have a project up and running very quick. And finally, when it comes to charger selection, and you mentioned it before, I think Washington is like a rock star and in this space. So having someone that has knowledge and experience doing these things and has done it many times is really helpful for that little last bit. And we're talking education, when you actually put the user in front of the charging station and explaining what to do. There was the situations when people were confronted with the charging and the electric vehicle because it was the first time they were having these things, and they didn't hesitate to pick up the phone and contact JetCharge, and they were keen to explain them, well, this is what they have to do. Just, it's super simple, it's super straightforward, but you need someone to tell you all you have to do is to get the plug, put it in the car, green light, it's charging, all good to go.
I mean, I guess on that point, I guess the more, obviously we're involved in the comms piece, but what has been the reaction of staff in general to date to the vehicles themselves as opposed to the charging infrastructure and just the whole program?
I think, and you were with us in the first stages. We have two workshops, and it's interesting because we had initial reactions like, this is not going to work. And I remember initial meetings when people said, these cars are too small, they're too expensive, and the range doesn't work. This is not suitable for our day-to-day business. And we've been 12 months working with all these people and with all your good help then. And now they're champions. We have people that is going out there spreading the word, thinking this is awesome. This is something everyone should do. I'm gonna buy one for myself. And it's really interesting to see this behavior change and this transition, because when someone is really against something and at some point that conversion happens, they became advocates and they are very vocal and vocal and saying, this is great, this is awesome, look at all these benefits, we're saving money on fuel. So it's really, I'm really glad to see this transition.
Great. Did you want to mention anything else, Tim, before we wrap up? Is there anything in terms of other industry directions or anything you would advise fleets?
Yeah, so I would say a really good first step for anyone who's thinking of transitioning to an EV fleet is just get a first opinion from your on-site maintenance electrician. So get your on-site maintenance electrician just to kind of discuss with you, walk through the building, talk about the state of the electrical infrastructure so that you're well equipped. But then once you've kind of moved beyond that point, bringing a specialist, and JetCharge obviously would be honored to have your work, but there are others. Just contact someone coming because they might have the technology solutions to overcome a lot of the concerns that you have. And then once you've gone through all of that, just be very certain in defining roles. One of the challenges that we had was, there were lots of people involved and everyone had an opinion on everything. And if you don't clearly define roles, who's responsible for what, it tends to slow the project a little bit. And so, yeah, make sure you do that. But a really simple, easy way to do it is just to get your electrician who you currently use and just walk through the building. That's my advice.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for spending the time. And as Tim's mentioned a number of times, this is not advertisement for us or JetCharge, and there are others like ABB and Evenergi and others on the line. So we encourage you to talk broadly if you are on the phone and looking for solutions. But yeah, that brings us to the end. And Charge Together is having an official formal launch on the 8th of October, and we'll be launching our tools and our platforms, and we're really excited. I think people who are helping us test, like Ausgrid and NRMA and others, there's a pretty good excitement about how much they're going to help people to simplify the process of understanding the costs and benefits of migrating to electric vehicles, as well as having a lot of knowledge on the knowledge base that we're building. So we're very excited about that, and we encourage you, once we do roll that out, we'll be contacting those that have signed up, getting them set up on the systems, giving them usernames and passwords, and we encourage you to get in there and give us feedback and use the tools. So thank you all again for attending, and we do have another number of webinars coming up. The next one is about electric buses, which should be very interesting, a lot of interest in that particular use case. So look forward to seeing you again then, and yeah, thanks again.